Hey everyone, and welcome to the Retro channel. And yes, we are back with the Commodore 1084S. This is the one that I recently modded to add a SCART connector to, and we're going to do a few more mods on this thing because thanks to Adrian from Adrian's Digital Basement, he discovered a couple of issues with my mod that didn't work on his 1084. Now it should be noted that he has a regular 1084, so not the S version, just the mono version, and his monitor was laid out slightly differently. And it was after a couple of days that we both figured out that the mods that I did on this monitor won't work on every 1084. So we came up with a better solution that should cover all bases. So while I did do some thorough testing on this monitor when I performed the previous mod, and I believe even Matt from RetroBits, who I'll link to in the video description, he's done the same mod on a 1084S, obviously a North American model because he's in the US, and he said it worked for him as well. But I have since found with this mod there are still some very rare occasions where we'll have sync issues. So what we're going to do today is undo the previous mod that I did on this monitor and then do the new mod that Adrian and I came up with. But before I go tearing the old mod out, let's have a look at this fairly rare but still possible sync issue. So at the moment the PS1 is hooked up via SCART and it's using composite video for the sync source, and as you can see everything looks fine. I have shrunk the screen size down a little bit just so we can see all edges of the video signal. And if we fire up Mega Man 8 here, which is actually what Adrian was using to test the original mod, this is where we're going to see possibly some issues. So keep an eye on this top left corner of the screen. Did you see that slight little wiggle there? That's the sync issue that I'm talking about. But with Adrian's 1084, it was much worse. It seems this monitor just handles everything a little bit better, but it's still not perfect. And once this goes away, yeah, see, we got a little bit of rolling there. So there's definitely still a problem with this sync mod, and let's just power that off. And the reason for that is because the current mod that's in here attempts to treat all sync sources as the same, regardless of if it's C-Sync, which is just the pure sync pulses, or if it's, say, composite video, which also obviously contains the horizontal and vertical sync pulses. Everything basically gets treated the same with this current mod, but as we've seen, there are still edge cases where we can lose sync. The upside of the current mod is we can send any sync source into either the SCART connector or the analog DIN, and for 99% of the time it'll work just fine. But the downside is obviously that little sync issue. There's also, if we send composite video over the SCART connector, so not RGB, just regular composite video, that will not work with this current mod because it's trying to just extract the sync information from that video signal and not the rest of the composite video signal. And it completely ignores the SCART fast blanking signal, which is what most SCART devices would use to switch into RGB mode automatically. It's also used for things like teletext and various screen overlays usually, but we're not going to get into that with this monitor. We're really only interested in this thing being able to display SCART and have solid sync. So basically we'll lose the option to use composite video for sync on the analog DIN connector, but these monitors weren't necessarily designed to do that in the first place. That was just a little bonus of this mod. But what we'll gain is the ability to use composite video over the SCART connector, as long as fast blanking isn't activated, because remember, fast blanking will automatically switch into RGB mode. But most SCART cables, if they're a composite video SCART cable and not an RGB SCART cable, they're not going to have that fast blanking activated anyway. We'll also gain solid sync performance, and this new mod should work with both the 1084S and the regular 1084 mono version. So if you want to see the issues that Adrian had with the original mod and his monitor, definitely go check out his video. I'll throw a link to it up there and in the video description. But yeah, after a couple of days, we found a much better solution, which he sort of explains at the end of the video. I'm making this video because obviously my original mod isn't quite perfect, so I want to sort of correct the record there, I guess, and also to show how to do the new and improved mod. Yeah, I guess it's kind of a tricky thing with YouTube. If you use it for instructional videos, if those instructions change at some point, you can't just go back and change the old video. So it is what it is, but I want to sort of correct that for everyone. The original mod that's currently in here isn't dangerous or anything. It just doesn't perform as well as this new mod we're about to do. Hopefully that all made sense. So yeah, let's get this old mod out, and I've got chapters on this video, so if you haven't done the previous mod, you can just skip straight to installing the new mod if you prefer. All right, let's undo the old mod, get this thing back to stock, and then we can look at how to do the new mod. So we're going to move TS405 back to TS406, remove these two jumper links, reinstall the 820 ohm resistor at R405 where this lower jumper link is, remove R402 and R403, remove C401, and remove the jumper link at 9289 behind the SCART connector. I'm not going to remove the SCART connector, that seems a bit extreme, but obviously you'll need to install a SCART connector. All the parts for the new mod, along with steps on how to do it, are in the video description, and they should also be on Adrian's video if you look there as well. May as well use the desoldering gun to make this quick and easy. Alright. You're gone. Alright, all the stuff from the previous mod is removed. We just need to put this transistor back at TS406 where it originally was. Alright, and with that done, we are back to how this was originally configured from the factory. Obviously, apart from the SCART connector, which I'm not going to take out just to put back in. And Adrian and I have put together a parts list and also step-by-step instructions for both the stereo and mono versions. They do differ slightly, obviously around the audio side of things, so that shouldn't be a surprise. But yeah, definitely check the video description for an up-to-date list, because some of this may still be wrong, and I guess I'm about to find out. So yeah, don't worry about trying to pause the video to read all this. It'll all be in the video description. So we're going to need a 390 ohm resistor, and yes, these parts are used because I had them installed in this monitor for the new mod, and then I undid all that when we decided it was working perfectly and put the old mod back in just so I could make this new video. 390 ohm resistor, we need a 1K resistor, which should be that one, I guess, because I've got it laying around next to me. A SCART connector, that's already installed. A 1N4148 diode or equivalent, that's that one. And for the stereo version, which is what I've got, a 390 ohm resistor. Obviously for the mono version, you need three 5.6K resistors and one 22K resistor. There are some optional parts for the fastblanking override. That's a optional mod that Adrian came up with, basically repurposing the VCR switch on the back of these monitors to force on fastblanking, basically forcing the monitor into RGB mode. But I'll explain how that all works once we've got the basics of this mod complete. There is a note that some jumper links and parts might be already installed, and if that's the case, just move along to the next step. We did find with Adrian's monitor, he had a couple of jumper links around the SCART connector, which wasn't installed from the factory anyway, that were already populated. So it's almost like Commodore or Philips, I guess, who originally made these monitors, kind of just made all this stuff up as they went along. There doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to some of it, but yeah, if a jumper link is already installed, you can leave it be. If it's not there, you're going to need to install it. So we'll start with step one, 390 ohm resistor at R210, and we have included rough locations for all these parts. So R210 should be just behind the SCART connector somewhere, and oh, there's R210, and it's already got a 390 ohm resistor in it. That's just because I didn't uninstall it when I undid the new mod. So if there's no resistor there, put a 390 ohm in. let's go to step 2, which I think is going to be, yeah, 1K resistor at R220. Again, I forgot to uninstall that, but chances are it's not going to be populated. So 1K resistor at R220 and a 390 ohm at R210. Jumper links at 9270, 9274 and 9275. They're all in that same area. And I can see 9275 already was installed from the factory. We need one at 9274 and 9270, which I can't see. Oh, 9270, my monitor already had one installed from the factory, so just 9274 then. Obviously, most of these holes you'll have to clear out before you can actually install components in them. I didn't go that crazy and, you know, cover up all the holes again. That seemed a little bit too much. Right, we've got all those jumper links in. Remove jumper links at 9289 behind the SCART connector. My monitor doesn't have 9289 installed, but I'm pretty sure Adrian's 1084 did, so double check that. And remove the jumper link at 9290 towards the middle of the board if installed. So yeah, my monitor doesn't have 9290 installed, so we don't have to worry about removing that jumper either. Install the 1N4148 diode at 9290 with the band facing the front of the monitor. So that same location. If there was a jumper link there, remove it. If not, don't worry. And either way, install our diode into that location with the band on the diode facing the front of the monitor. Right, our diode is in, so now we've got instructions for the stereo model and separate instructions for the mono version. So we're going to follow the stereo version and remove the right channel audio and ground wires from the SCART footprint, which is required to install the SCART connector. Obviously, I've already done that because our SCART connector is already in, but you'll find that if you haven't already done a previous mod, you'll have 2 wires sticking into where the SCART footprint would be. You just need to desolder them and solder the right channel audio wire to the existing wire at triangle 91 and the audio ground wire to the existing wire at triangle 78. They're both behind the SCART connector, so I'd recommend doing this before you actually install the SCART connector if you haven't already, because they're a little bit easier to access. Alternatively, you can remove this audio amplifier board. So there's just a couple of twist tabs on the rear that you need to straighten. You should be able to pull that off those tabs and sort of set that out of the way. And yeah, because I've already done this, those wires are already soldered, but you can see one of them is labeled triangle 91. So this wire here, the little red wire, was already installed. That goes over to the amplifier board for right channel audio. So we just need to solder the white wire that we took out of that SCART footprint and basically tack that onto the red wire. And then down here, there's a little triangle and it says 78 next to it. Basically take the black wire that was in the SCART footprint and tack it onto that connection. If you want to confirm that you've got everything correct, just go from the black RCA jack over to our little audio amplifier board, and it should be connected to what's labeled pin 6 on this board. Likewise, the white RCA jack should go to pin 5, and pin 4 should be just connected to ground. And there shouldn't be any shorts between any of these pins. You can also double check the audio connections for the SCART socket. So the first pin, the one furthest away on the top row, should be right channel audio, so that should go to pin 6 on this board. The next pin over, which is pin 4 on the SCART connector, should go to pin 4 on this board. And the third pin across is pin 6 on SCART, and that's going to go to pin 5 on this board, just to be a little confusing. So that's all good. We've got our audio wires done, our SCART connector is in, and now we just need a 390 ohm resistor at R504 behind the AV jacks. So Once again, this is going to be tricky to see because of all these wires everywhere, but directly behind the AV jacks is R504. We're going to stick a 390, that's not a 390. We're going to stick a 390 ohm resistor in there. All right, that is in, and on that note, yeah, we're basically done with the SCART mod. Obviously, if you had the mono version, then you'd want to do those steps, and this is the part where the optional mod for fast blanking using the VCR switch comes in. But before we get into all that, let's just test this out and make sure everything's working as expected, and then I'll explain what this fast blanking override does. Oh shit, I forgot to put that 820 back at R405. Better do that first. Normally that would be there from factory, so it's only removed because I removed it. Right, monitor's reassembled, it's plugged into power, so let's power this thing on. Hopefully I remembered to reconnect everything. Seems fine. Bring on the PlayStation, and at the moment the RGB switch is set to RGB mode. So as you can see, unlike before, we now don't have sync, but if we push the RGB switch in, everything's perfect. So this is relying on the fast blanking input, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a second. Let's just first make sure that our sync is perfectly stable. So remember, we had a little bit of issues in that top corner, and now it's solid. And likewise, after this first part of the intro, we shouldn't get any rolling when it switches to that white screen. Just here. Perfect. No issues whatsoever. So our sync and SCART mod is working perfectly. No more issues with sync. So while it might seem counterintuitive to need this set to composite in order to use RGB on SCART, that's kind of how SCART works, because we're now using that fast blanking pin to tell the monitor to switch from composite video input to our RGB input rather than this button. This will still work for switching to RGB on the analog and digital DIN inputs, so you need to have this set to RGB to use those still, but for SCART and RGB, you'd want to have that switch set to composite. And it doesn't matter if the SCART cable is using composite video for the sync, or if it's using Luma for sync, or C-Sync, all of them are going to work with this new mod. Now there are a couple of edge cases where you may want to manually enable fast blanking, and that is basically using the analog DIN connector to bring in RGB and using composite for sync, which won't work if you feed it into the analog DIN connector. However, if you enable fast blanking and send the composite video signal either into pin 20 of the SCART connector or the composite video input jack, then you'll have sync. But you'll need to manually activate fast blanking because that's expected to come over the SCART connector, and if you're using the DIN connector, obviously you're not using the SCART connector. The other edge case is if you've got a SCART cable that doesn't have any voltage on the fast blanking pin, which is normally pin 16. For SCART devices, there should always be sort of between 1.5 to 3 volts on pin 16 if it's trying to do RGB, but there may be cables out there that don't conform to that spec, and in which case you'll need to manually activate fast blanking. And the way to do that is the little ingenious way that Adrian came up with, and that is by repurposing this VCR switch on the back to basically force fast blanking on. The VCR switch on these monitors is practically useless. I've never needed to use it, even when hooking up a PAL VCR to one of these monitors. And yeah, Adrian found the same. He's never needed to use that switch, so we can use it for something else. Right, with the board free again, we can do the optional mod to enable fast blanking override using the VCR switch. So these are all the steps. The parts are actually listed over here, so maybe we should put those together. A 10K resistor, 1N4148 diode or equivalent, The 2.4 volt Zener diode and the 1.5K resistor may already be installed, so you'd want to double check those first. See steps 15 and 16 for details, which are back over here. So these should probably go further up here. Anyway, double check that R575 towards the middle of the board is a 1.5K resistor. It should be brown, green, red, gold. So R575 is this guy right here next to the TDA 3505, and on my board I actually have a 330 ohm resistor. On Adrian's board he already had the 1.5K resistor, so we need to remove the 330 ohm one and put a 1.5K in there instead. Right, R575 is now 1.5K, and like I said, you may already have a 1.5K installed there. And the next step, the Zener diode, is at D576, which is just here. And as you can see, I've already got a 2.4 volt Zener diode, and Adrian's monitor also had that diode installed. But we have seen by looking at the schematics for all these monitors, some of them might have a resistor in that position, which is labeled R576. So if you've got a resistor there, you're going to need to take that out and install a 2.4 volt Zener with the band facing towards the rear of the monitor. So yeah, I think these steps should move up to here. That's a terrible arrow. And these optional parts should probably go with the rest of the instructions. So, jumping back a little bit, solder a 10K resistor and a 1N4148 diode in series with the diode band facing away from the resistor. Now, because I have already tested this mod, I've already covered everything in heat shrink, but we've got the resistor there, so that's a 10K resistor. That connects to the diode, which is under here, and the band on the diode is facing away from the resistor. So then we just connect the 10K resistor to the middle pin of SK5, which is the VCR switch. So here's the VCR switch labeled SK5. We don't need to cut any traces or anything. And these two middle pins are connected together. So it doesn't matter which one you connect the resistor to, it's all the same. Just like that. So our 10K resistor is connected to the middle pin of the switch, and the diode comes after that with the band facing that way. And then we need to solder a length of wire from the 1N4148 diode on the band side, which is this wire here that I've already done and obviously heat shrinked all that. And connect it to jumper link 9290 on the side towards the front of the monitor. If you remember jumper link 9290, we've already visited before. That's where we installed that first diode. So our wire is going to connect to 9290 on the pad closest to the front of the monitor. Just like that. And of course you want to make sure everything here is heat shrinked, and try and keep these wires away from the flyback or the high voltage area. And yeah, you should be good. Just make sure, you know, it doesn't get snagged on any of these pins around here. And that is our optional fast blanking mod. So how this actually works is we've got either 12 volts or ground on the middle pin of the VCR switch. So when it's on, there's 12 volts here, and when it's off, it's just ground. So our resistor drops the 12 volts down to something around 3 volts, which is the standard for fast blanking, and the diode is just there to prevent voltage going from this direction back into the switch. That's pretty similar to what this other diode is doing on the other side. It's just stopping any voltage from this circuit up here feeding back into the SCART connector on pin 16. So let's put this thing together for the last time. I don't want to do any more mods to this monitor. I've seen far more than I wanted to of this board. Obviously, if you try this mod out and run into an issue, keep it to yourself. I don't want to fucking hear about it. No, I'm just kidding. Leave a comment, we'll try and work through it. But this should all be working. So let me put all this back together, we'll test it out, and I'll demonstrate how this fast blanking override works. All right, we're back together. Let's power the monitor on. And yes, I've reconnected the power LED. Turn the PS1 on. don't know what mode it's currently set to. It's set to, oh yeah, composite. So we've got fast blanking working, so this is actually RGB that we're seeing. If I push the VCR switch on the back of the monitor, you can see that it makes no difference. It's just locked in RGB mode. And that is because we've already got the fast blanking signal coming in over the SCART cable from the PS1. So yeah, no obvious change at the moment, but that is because our SCART cable is correctly wired. Let's incorrectly wire it and see what that does. So I'm just going to crack this thing open and remove the connection to pin 16, which is the fast blanking pin on SCART. And I see there's actually a resistor on pin 16. So I think it's taking 5 volts from the PS1, which is coming in on pin 8 of the SCART connector. That's the function switching pin, which is not something we're using here, so don't even worry about it. But that resistor is just there to drop the voltage from 5 volts down to the more common, 1.5 to 3 volts. So I've just disconnected that resistor, which means we won't have that voltage on the function switching anymore. And if we plug all this back in, power everything back on, so everything still looks good there, but I can actually tell that this is composite video that we're now looking at. So even though we've got RGB coming from the PlayStation through the SCART connector, because we don't have that fast blanking activated, it's now showing us the composite signal from pin 20 rather than just using composite for sync. So pushing the RGB switch, when it's in RGB mode, we lose sync because it's not looking for sync from that composite video signal. That's normal. And if we push the VCR button now, try not to electrocute myself, that's RGB. So the VCR button is on, we're forcing fast blanking to be activated, so it's going to show us the RGB signal. And if we turn that off, we get composite video. Oh, and the battery literally just died on that camera. You can kind of see it on this one, but yeah, that's definitely composite video. And with the switch on, we're getting the RGB without relying on fast switching from the console. So seeing as that camera has died, it's probably only a matter of time. In fact, the overhead one, I can see it's about to overheat and shut down because these Sony ZV-1 cameras like to do that. So probably should wrap this video up. I have tested all these mods with, CGA, analog RGB, both via the DIN connector and the SCART connector. Everything is working perfectly, no sync issues whatsoever. And yeah, we can now properly use the SCART connector for composite video. So if you've just got a cable that doesn't have RGB, you've just got a regular SCART cable that just has composite, you can plug that in. It should work just fine as long as you're not forcing the fast blanking override on. Otherwise, it's going to try and display RGB, which won't be there on the cable. So yeah, everything seems to be working, and Adrian obviously tested all this with his 1084. Everything's working perfectly for him as well. So that should be it for the SCART mod on the 1084 monitors. This should be pretty much universal, so should work with both the 1084 and the 1084S, and both PAL and NTSC. So yeah, massive thanks to Adrian for trying it out on his 1084 and for it not working on his 1084, I guess, because now we've got a new and improved mod that should work with everything. Yeah, like I said, if you're using the analog DIN connector, that's still going to work just fine with either horizontal or vertical sync or C-sync. But if you want to use the analog DIN plus composite video for sync, you're going to need to do the fast blanking override mod and feed composite video into either the composite video RCA jack or pin 20 of the SCART connector. So it is a little bit more universal because out of the box, you couldn't use composite video for sync when using the analog DIN connector on these monitors. So a little bit more functionality there, and yeah, I think it's a win-win all round. Definitely better than the previous mod. But with that being said, if you have done the previous mod and it's working just fine, if you're happy with it, feel free to just leave it alone if you don't want to go back into the monitor and change a bunch more things. That mod was perfectly safe. It just had those you know, rare sync issues. So Matt from Retro Bits, if you're watching, because I know you did the mod that I recently showed, yeah, if that's still working for you and you're happy with it, feel free to leave it. But if you want to change to this now new and improved mod, sorry for the stuff around. And same for anyone else who did the mod that I previously showed, and now I'm back showing yet another mod. Apologies. It is what it is. You can't really update old YouTube videos. All I can do is make a new video to correct previous videos. I think I'll set that one to unlisted once this video comes out, just so people don't, you know, find that video first and then do that mod, and then they find this video and go, oh, what the fuck, man? So, yeah, that might be the way to go. Anyway, these monitors are awesome. Adrian, obviously awesome. We all know that. Matt from Retro Bits, thank you and sorry. And yeah, anyone else who tried the previous mod, thank you and sorry. That's it for me. Thanks to all my patrons who help keep this channel running. I'm not sponsored at all on this channel anymore because I really want this channel to just be our thing. I don't want to have it interrupted by sponsorships and product placement and all that other bullshit. So my patrons really are the ones that are keeping this channel running now. And yeah, if you want to also support the channel and get a bunch of perks in return, like ad-free early access, along with discounts on my Tindy store, yeah, please do check out the Patreon page linked in the video description. Apart from that, even if you can't support on Patreon, just liking, subscribing, sharing these videos around. If you know someone with a 1084 monitor, you know, throw them a video link or put it on your favorite forum or Discord or whatever. Yeah, really at the end of the day, I'm interested in helping people out. But obviously that takes time and money, so, you know, swings and roundabouts. But yeah, that is it for me. I'm rambling now. Both my cameras, well, the overhead camera and the side camera have already shut down long ago. So yeah, no doubt this main one's going to shut down, especially if I keep babbling on. So that is it for me. Thank you all for watching. See you next time. Bye. Good 1080.